Chapter 20. Nancy's eyes widened as she opened the door, and before even saying hello, she turned and hollered back into the house. "Aaron, get out here, it's Tyler!" She pulled him in for a fierce hug. "I guess you've been watching," he said with a chuckle. "Of course I have. Now, when do we get to meet this Laney?" She glanced around as if looking for the cameras. Tyler laughed. "There's no camera today, but how can you be certain Laney's coming?" The final episode hadn't aired yet. He wasn't even sure if the episode of their disastrous group date had aired. She waved her hand in a dismissive gesture. "Don't be ridiculous. I could tell from the first time you guys interacted that she was the one for you. I probably knew before you did." She punched him lightly on the arm before pulling him inside. He fixed her with a narrowed gaze. "How? As far as I know, the first time we interacted together with the cameras running was the group date." She raised her eyebrow at him. "You don't know?" "Evidently not, though I'm not sure what I don't know. Please fill me in." "Tyler, before the episode that Laney joined the contestants, they aired half an hour of footage of the two of you. The day you met, the limo ride before the beach date, that moment in your main room when I was almost certain you were going to kiss her. Why didn't you kiss her?" Tyler sighed and ignored the question. He'd known there were cameras in the house, but he'd had no idea they were in his room or the limo, nor had he known they'd been recording the whole time. But it made sense. After working with Justin and Peter, he would put nothing past them. "Okay, so you saw that footage. But still, how could you possibly know I chose Laney?" "Because I'm not stupid. I saw that look in your eye. The same one I saw in Aaron's eye when I knew he had decided to propose to me. It was the look of a man in love." She wagged her finger at him and wiggled her eyebrows. "You don't think it's too soon to propose? I mean, it's only been a few weeks." Even though he had already popped the question, he wanted to know Nancy's thoughts before she knew of the proposal. She crossed her arms and fixed him with an even gaze. "First of all, there's no such thing. When you know, and God's hand was pretty evident in all of this. But for argument's sake, let me ask you something." He bit back a smile. He had missed Nancy and her no-nonsense approach to things. "Okay, shoot." "Is she the first thing you think of when you wake up? The last thing you think of before you go to sleep?" "Of course, but—" "Can you imagine your life with her?" He rolled his eyes. "Okay, now, can you imagine life without her?" Even though he had already proposed, that stopped him, and he paused to think. He could see Laney in his life for sure, but the thought of continuing in life without her held no appeal. "That," she pointed at his face, "that is how I know you've decided. Now let me see the ring." Tyler laughed and shook his head. "I don't have it." "I don't believe that for a second. Anyone with half a brain knows you already bought it." He shrugged, enjoying stringing her along for a moment. "I didn't buy a ring. Hey, man, good to have you back. You are back, right?" Aaron entered the living room and crossed to Tyler, holding out his hand for a shake. "I am. Well, I have one more episode to film elsewhere, but otherwise I am." "When do we get to meet Laney?" Nancy smiled at her husband before shooting a triumphant look at Tyler. "That's what I said. You'll get to meet her soon." "Good, because I've known since the first time they showed her that she was the one for you. I was hoping you wouldn't be so dense that you'd miss that she cared about you. You had me worried for a few of those episodes. It's not a normal situation." "Well, why don't you tell us all about it over dinner? I made spaghetti." Nancy linked her arm through his and led the way to the kitchen. Tyler couldn't help grinning. It was so good to be home. He had really missed Aaron and Nancy the last few weeks, and he too couldn't wait for them to meet Laney. Laney gingerly stepped out of the limo and grabbed her donut pillow. She couldn't believe she still had to carry the thing around nearly 2 weeks after her fall, but her booty was still sore if she sat for too long. Tyler stood at the bottom step of his house, grinning at her and looking devastatingly handsome in a pair of jeans and his cowboy hat. She hadn't seen him in over a week. They had kept Laney working for another show while they sent Tyler back to his ranch to get caught up. The distance had been hard, but they'd called each other and begun a video devotional a few times a week. "How's the tuchus?" he teased as he walked toward her. "Healing nicely, thank you very much. I should be fine as long as you don't expect me to go trail riding today." His lips twisted into a grimace. "Oh, my friends live in the back country, and the only way to get there is by horseback." "Very funny," she said as she punched him in the arm. He caught her hand on the way back and pulled her to his chest. His arms wound around her waist and her breath caught. "There is still a camera, you know," she indicated Mary Ann with a nod of her head. "I don't care. I've been waiting too long to do this again." His head lowered and his lips pressed down on hers, sending a flame of desire all the way down to her toes. Her arms wound around his neck, and she leaned into him, enjoying the heat that burned between them. Laney had a hard time catching her breath when the kiss ended. "Well, with welcome kisses like that, I might have to go away more often." "Don't you dare," he whispered in her ear before pulling back. "Come on, let me show you the ranch, and then I'll take you to meet Aaron and Nancy." He laced his fingers through hers as he led her up the stairs and onto the porch. "One day, I want to have a big wraparound porch here with a rocker or a swing and a table." Breakfast on the porch? She'd never had one growing up in the city, but she'd always thought they sounded nice. The closest she'd ever gotten was a tiny balcony, big enough to fit a single chair in one apartment she lived in. Unfortunately, when she'd sat and tried to drink her coffee in the morning, the sound of the traffic and honking had made it less than a peaceful experience. Here, though, she could see it. Tyler's plot of land was huge, and there were no neighbors as far as the eye could see. She wondered if she'd be able to handle the quiet. He didn't take her on a fool tour, as she'd needed to be able to ride for that. But he showed her the house, the barn, and enough of the ranch to leave her in awe. The place was large, larger than any apartment she had lived in. Laney had no idea how to quantify a rancher's success, but she thought he'd done well for himself. "Ready to go meet the woman who brought us together?" he asked when they returned to the front of the house. Laney nodded. She had wanted to meet Nancy since he first spoke of her. Nancy and Aaron's house was even bigger than Tyler's, and Laney could see why he wanted the wraparound porch. They had one, and it was beautiful. Tyler laced his fingers through hers and flashed her a smile before ringing the doorbell. A woman, dressed simply in flannel and jeans, opened the door. Her eyes lit up when she saw Tyler, and Laney assumed it had to be Nancy. "Hey, Nancy, I'd like you to meet Laney." Nancy turned her warm brown eyes on Laney, and the look she sent made Laney feel as if they'd been friends forever. "Laney, it's so nice to meet you." "You as well. I didn't think I would ever meet anyone on a reality TV show, but I'm certainly glad you made Tyler audition." She looked up at Tyler and smiled, still unsure of how she ended up with him. "I want to hear all about what didn't air live or on the cameras. Tyler told me some, but you know how men are. They miss all the best details." She flashed a conspiratorial smile at Tyler before grabbing Laney's arm and leading her into the house. "Don't mind me. I'll just go find Aaron and discuss things without details." "Okay, so spill. I want to know when you first fell for Tyler." Laney laughed at Nancy's excited demeanor. She was like a kid tasting candy for the first time. "Well, it would probably be when I literally fell into his arms, or he caught my fall, rather." Nancy laughed. "You do seem to fall a lot near him." "I'm not usually that big of a klutz, but his eyes..." She trailed off, unsure exactly how to put into words what his eyes were, but Nancy seemed to understand. As Laney continued to answer Nancy's questions, she knew they would be good friends. "Okay, you have to meet my husband, Aaron. He'll never admit it, but I think he's just as excited to meet you as I was." Laney chuckled as she followed Nancy outside. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had been so excited to meet her. Aaron was a man of average build with warm brown eyes just like Nancy's. "You must be Laney," he said as he pulled her in for a hug. "It's so nice to meet you." It was a good thing Laney wasn't opposed to hugging, as Tyler's friends seemed intent on it. "It's nice to meet you, too. I'd say I've heard so much about you, but I haven't." Aaron feigned a hurt expression and turned to Tyler. "Really, man? Not a word?" Tyler shrugged and flashed a wink at Laney. "It was an odd situation. So you keep saying. Speaking of which, when is the big day?" Laney turned to Tyler, surprised to see his jaw tighten. "Oh, we haven't talked about it yet, much less set a date. Actually, the date is in 4 months. Tyler's voice sounded pained and tight. Laney's head shot forward. "What?" The color drained from his face. "They didn't tell you. Justin said he would talk to you about the contract." "Contract? What contract? Are you getting paid to marry me?" "It's not like that," Tyler began. "No? Then why don't you tell me what it is like? I accepted your proposal because I care for you, and I wanted to get to know you better. Even though we haven't known each other long, I felt like we were supposed to be together. But now you're telling me you signed a contract to marry me?" Her voice rose in pitch at the end. Laney hated the sound of it, but seemed powerless to stop it. Hear me out, Laney. After your fall, I didn't want to continue, but I had signed the initial contract. Proposing to you and letting them film the wedding was the compromise. I didn't know they hadn't told you. Though his words made sense, Laney's insecurities had reared their ugly heads again, making her question everything. The timing, their feelings, the future. Excuse me, I need a minute. Laney pulled open the sliding glass door and stormed through the house. She didn't stop until she had stepped through the front door and was on the porch. The air had cooled as the sun set and she shivered from the chill, but she didn't go back inside. Instead, she sat on the porch swing, letting the bite in the air sharpen her thoughts. She'd thought the hard part would be over now that the show was finished, but it appeared the truly hard part was just beginning. Hey, you okay? Mary Ann stood in the doorway without her camera. Laney had gotten so used to the camera following her everywhere for the past few weeks that she had forgotten Mary Ann had even been in the room. But she was thankful it was her friend who had come out to check on her instead of Tyler or Nancy. I don't know. I know I care for him, but this feels fast? Laney nodded and grabbed her necklace. It was a simple cross, and she was so used to wearing it that she often forgot it was there. But whenever she felt really stressed, rubbing her thumb across the simple design always seemed to calm her down. Mary Ann shook her head as she sat next to Laney on the swing. I know it's hard, but he's not Brian, Laney. Brian? What do you mean? Don't you mean Dallas? No, I mean Brian. You don't remember? Laney shook her head. Freshman year, before you set your sights on Dallas, you liked a boy named Brian. Maybe I remember because I had just met you and you talked about him all the time. I thought you were a little boy crazy. Laney snorted. She probably had been boy crazy, but most teenage girls were. Anyway, one day he asked you out in a note or something. You were so excited because you were supposed to meet after school and walk to the local hangout. But when I arrived at the meeting spot, he told me it had been a joke. Laney said the words slowly as the memory came back to her. She had forgotten, or maybe blocked, that painful memory. Thanks for the walk down memory lane. But why would you bring that up? Because I think your lack of faith in men stems from this interaction with Brian. Look at your track record after that incident. Less than a month later, you declared your crush on Dallas. You focused all your attention on a boy who was not attainable. Laney opened her mouth to argue. Not attainable might be a little bit of a stretch. True, she had been invisible in high school, but Dallas had flirted with her at the hospital. However, before she could utter a word, Mary Ann continued. I think you focused on Dallas because you were afraid of getting hurt again, and if he never asked you out, he could never hurt you. Now you're afraid that Tyler has ulterior motives, but he's not Brian. I watched him with you. He loves you. And this reality show made your relationship different. It made it public and fast and maybe a little messy, but that's not always a bad thing. I've been doing this show a long time and I've watched all the relationships. You know how I know you two will be okay? How? Because you have the one thing the other couple had who lasted. What's that? Your faith. All these couples that fail have nothing to stand on. They meet, they're attracted, some I think even fall in love. But when they get out into the real world, they have nothing grounding them, no common goal. You guys do. Like the other couple who lasted, you two have your faith in God. You both know that putting God first is the key to any successful relationship. And so what if he gets a little more money for proposing when he did? You got something too, right? Though it pained her, Laney nodded. She had taken something in exchange for agreeing to become a contestant. Tyler's wasn't any worse. Mary Ann didn't say I told you so, but it was written all over her face. I thought so. Besides, this money they're giving benefits you as well. It's money to help his ranch, a place you'll probably be living at soon. Laney stared at her friend. When had she become so wise? In high school, Jennifer had been the outspoken one of the group who was always offering advice. But either Mary Ann had been listening or she'd grown a lot in the past 10 years. Did you major in psychology? Mary Ann laughed. No, but working in the entertainment industry gives me plenty of opportunities to dispense my wonderful advice. Now, come on, why don't we go back inside, eat that wonderful smelling dinner, and find out what else is in the contract? Laney still had her reservations, but Mary Ann's words did make sense. Okay, let's go.